Hello, everyone. So great to see everybody here. Becky said that this was my tribe, and it's true. Definitely, I definitely feel that I am one of you. So, have I got any slides? Yes. So my brief, as you've been told, is to do a quick romp through history, to sort of see what we can learn from history. Though, as my history teacher once said to me, well, several times she said to me, the only thing you learn from history is that nobody ever learned anything from history. And it is unfortunately very true. But anyway, my remit is to one of the key things I do at the moment is I look after content at the Archive of Market and Social Research. And I feel I was at heart a historian, and I only got into mathematics and computing, whatever, by mistake. But it was probably more lucrative, so I don't regret it too much. But being able to mine the archive is a real treat. I was just saying to somebody, my co-pilot, he thinks I'm an arch feminist because I'm always looking at what men were up to in the 1970s, excluding women from things and whatever. And he rewrites everything with that flavour. I have to tell him not to. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and take us through the history of things, changes that we've been through, how we've actually coped and thrived and brought order to chaos through some major changes, some of them quite apocalyptic, though with history they don't ever seem as apocalyptic as the present one. And then I'm going to just look at where the current situation is different or not. John Poulston has already told me that one of my slides is a bit out of date, but he's always ahead of me, so that's all right. And hopefully I'll conclude with some recommendations. So, in the beginning, I once asked Ed Ross in the it must have been the mid-1970s, why on earth he'd got into market research and why he'd not done something more interesting like the financial sector was really taking off at that point, of course, and you'd have thought that somebody as clever as Ed would have ended up in it. But what he explained to me was that in the 1960s, market research data was the main challenge, the most interesting challenge he could find to tackle. And he explained to me all sorts of things about IBM column binary, which I do understand really, but I won't explain to an audience like this because it's obvious that you already know it. But I thought it was interesting that someone like Ed thought that market research was a really significant challenge in the 1960s. So looking at the 1960s and 1970s, there's a mainframe computer, if you remember. They used to take up they took up the whole building of what is now Tate Modern, the central electricity generating board. We had punch cards and counter sorters, and some people even claim they use knitting needles to analyse punch cards. I've never believed that, though I have come across people who've claimed it. The mainframes were very large and extremely pernickety. We could only use them overnight because they had more important things to do during the day. If you put a comma instead of a full stop in your JCL language, the whole thing failed and you lost 24 hours of work. And you had to go there, you had to sort of decamp from your office at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get down there to load your punch cards early in the evening. And the new mini computers which came in the mid-70s were expensive. The one we bought at Denjon cost £30,000 in 1976. I think Ed helped us with that, actually. He was always richer than we were. And £30,000 was the price of an average London house in 1976. So it would be £300,000 or £400,000 equivalent now. And of course, they meant a change in behaviour because up till then, we girls used to write out our specs and send them off to other people to punch, and then the punch cards came back to us. But of course, we now had terminals, and we could now type our own specs, but that was very infra-dig for someone who'd decided not to be a secretary. And we nearly had a riot, actually, about that, but we all, because of course it was all so easy, we all settled down and started typing. And then probably it would have been easier if we'd learnt to type in the first place, but of course we didn't know. And then somewhere around that time, the program, Ed's program, which he developed with Gallup in Sweden, I think, was called Cumulus, and it became Quantum. And both of them actually are pretty good names when you think about it. And these were the days in the 70s where many serious technical, well, we all spent a lot of time in the pubs. The men more than girls, I have to say. They often left me behind to look after the office. And we used to decamp to the Marquis of Anglesey, which wasn't nearly so posh as it is now. And many a serious technical discussion was held here until. Now, does anybody know what the until was? Ed Ross was thrown out because he hadn't got any shoes on. So we all had to find another pub after that. So there you are. Data collection. So the main thing that technology did throughout the 70s and 80s, whatever, was make data collection easier and cheaper. I won't go through all of these. There was quite a nice chart that I didn't steal from Dan Noonan, which shows a gravestone bemoaning the death of market research in 1961, 1965, 1970. And everybody, people did, these were considered things that might ruin the industry as they went. And we've always responded to this quite well. And I was saying to Deborah Harding recently that, I was very proud of the market research industry because really the market research industry had always been very female friendly. I never met with any real resistance to me being around, perhaps because I work so hard. But also, it had never been very corrupt. I mean, you heard stories of the odd brown envelope around, didn't you? But we were never that corrupt an industry. And I was saying this, and Deborah said to me, yes, but there's now all this growing level of fraud. And so I've had to give up that hypothesis about how wonderful the market research industry, because of course, growing levels of fraud is a big problem. So Rebecca wanted me to look at what we had in the industry about how we'd survived previous recessions. And I wanted to put in loads of links, but it cluttered up the chart, and she didn't like that. So you'll be pleased to hear that they are all on the last slide if you want to look at all the links. But basically, if you look at the archive, obviously the trend over time is about cost cutting. Whatever you do, there is always that trend. Only the car industry has managed to keep its prices up for the period from the 1970s to now. But if you think of the terrible times of the mid-70s, inflation 25% or whatever, basically reviewing that, John Goodyear said what they'd noticed was an increase in the use of qualitative research because it was cheaper, and that drove that part of the industry. After the 90s disasters, they noted that we'd grown international research, and we in the UK were very good at international research, and that was one of the things we used to get through that recession. After the 2007 crisis at the BIG conference, they noted that basically we'd switched to delivering better insights and being more integrated. So in every case, you have to look for opportunity in change and find out where you are. And one thing that is very good about this industry is we've always taken a very scientific approach to change. We've always been very careful to monitor it, to measure it, to say what needs to be done as we change methodology. I mean, perhaps sometimes we've used these scientific methods to make changes that perhaps we shouldn't have, and we maybe suffer from that later. But if you just, a couple of examples that I found, a whole conference on attitude scales. I mean, that really does sound boring. Quota sampling, telephone interviewing was debated for a decade as to the validity of it and whether it was as good as face-to-face. And then come the late 2000s, no end of papers on online interviewing. Or was it valid? Could it be done? Should it matter? But just rounding up all those technological changes, this is, you have to remember, people who predict the impact of technologies do tend to get it wrong. And this is quite a favourite of mine, actually, because if you look at this, 1982, the fast forward button on VHS video recorders. And that was predicted to be the end of advertising. I find that media people do tend to catastrophize. Print has been dead. Print died 30 years before it actually did. But anyway, I have a friend who says that no smugness goes unpunished. So let's not be too flippant or too smug because we have survived well and thrived going past. There are three real things going on at the moment that we need to take a lot of note of because they might have a big effect. Fraud means trust is lost by respondents and by clients. Trust, because if nobody wants to take surveys, then we don't have any data to analyse. And of course, AI, which should be a productivity benefit and is a productivity benefit. But it could, if we believed all the naysayers, it could replace us, is what people are saying, isn't it? But in every case, we've got to not be smug and we've got to up our game, which we're very good at doing, especially, I think, this group of thing. But this sort of thing upsets me, this YouGov thing. Now, I heard about this first on a BBC religious programme early on a Sunday morning, and you think, well, that's not quite so bad, in that it probably didn't have a very big audience. But those people who listen to religious programmes on the BBC on Sunday morning are probably the ones who still fill in surveys. So, so you do have to worry about it. And what happened here, you've got this classic people doing surveys to make money. The anti-fraud tools had not been properly activated due to human or procedural error. Harder to reach, so they got basically a lot more ethnic minorities who of course go to church more or go to religious ceremonies more, and they didn't see that bias in the response data. And it took 2 years of argument before the poor old Bible Society had to admit that its data wasn't good. Now, this is not good, and I think that one of the things I hate about the industry every now and then is we always blame process or something on our faults. I think when, was it the 2015 inquiry into the general election, people said, oh, we'd got the wrong respondents. And I think, well, whose job is it to get the right respondents then if it's not ours? But we sort of passed it off somehow as a procedural error. And I think we're better than that. And I think this audience are certainly people to stamp out fraud. We must be more vigilant. Clients must ask questions. I mean, in 2008, we spent years writing these help research buyers buy online samples, and we assured clients that we had all these traps to pick everything up in. And we must be more careful now and not say, oh, we forgot to switch it on. Now, this is the point at which John Pawston says that actually synthetic data is more interesting than I think it is. But I think it's like data fusion and weighting. And we've got quotes there from some of the top people, Harrison Baker and O'Brien. I don't think it works. The respondents tend to be too similar. It doesn't detect new trends. It's looking backwards. But I'll leave you. You'll have to stay and listen to John. He's only has 77 slides, apparently. You'll have to hear him work through that for him to persuade you otherwise. But it is like data fusion and weighting. I'm no doubt we can get more out of it than we did out of that. But there you go. If real people won't do surveys, now this perhaps isn't our job, but it's certainly the industry's job, then go back to real interviews, go back to training people, pay them properly, make respondents understand. Have you ever seen any advertising saying how good market research data is and how it's all important that we should participate and whatever? No. Improve questionnaires. I mean, most questionnaires are awful, aren't they? And they ask the same things over and over again. And there has to be elements of mixed mode. You know, we can't just leave everything to online as we go through. I think that AI, I mean, I love AI. I have married it and divorced it several times, even in the last month. But it is a competent research assistant. It can do it's written for me 15 quality policies for the archive in half a day. Well, it was me who was slower. It did it in 20 seconds. It was me picking it up. I mean, I would never have got around to it. And it's absolutely marvellous to do that. And I think this is the thing, it can't distinguish between a good answer and a plausible answer. It hasn't got that background. And what's more, it tells lies, it gets things wrong, it makes things up, and it has no conscience. And mine actually told me a joke well, it wasn't telling me a joke, but it made a joke the other day, which made me feel quite squeamish. But what I really hate is when, I've learnt to make it check that it can read the report and whatever. And it says, yes, Phyllis, I can do that. And well, here's an example and whatever. And then it writes a story and I say, you didn't use the 1977 report so very much. And it said, well, actually, I couldn't read the 1977 report. I just wrote down what you'd said earlier. It's very dangerous because, and quite often I read a report and I think I wouldn't have summarised it that way. But as I said, it does tend to think I'm a mad feminist, so it puts things in that light. So, but is it bigger than previous? Yes, it is, because it's more universal. Every industry is talking about AI and how it will affect them. So there's much more awareness of the damage it can do. But I don't think it's any different than big data was, or admin data as it's now called. If people had really taken big data seriously, particularly the government, 15 years ago, and had worked to improve big data, admin data, whatever you like to call it, then it would be useful now, and it would have replaced a lot of surveys. But they didn't. Despite the fact we all told them that government data wasn't good enough to replace surveys. They could have worked at it, but they didn't. And it's that sort of thinking that you have to push back on. And my believing is AI can do tremendous amount of the heavy lifting. It's a tremendous asset. I wouldn't be without it now. But surveys will stay and AI will stay. But we're better than AI, a lot better than AI, especially if you get the stupid one. Have you noticed that when some days you get some of the cleverer than others? It's really quite remarkable. It's funny. So throughout history, what we've done is we've used technology to evolve our clients and the people we help, to evolve marketing. As we've got better at collecting data, we found different ways of collecting data. I imagine that's what John's going to talk about with synthetic respondents. You can find ways to use the new methods to enhance what you do. This is a chart I borrowed from Dan Noonan, which I liked very much, and it brings things home to you. So the example is shipbuilding. And on the left, you have shipbuilding in 1926. And on the right, a battleship, I think it is, in 2026. And the ship on the left took 10 to 15,000 men to build. And the ship on the right takes 800 to 1,000 to build. Now, that's 10,000 jobs gone, isn't it? And we don't all bemoan them, but it does show how automation over time makes huge differences to what you can do. So they said this on The Rest is History, which I'm also an addict to. Are we fit to change? He said the Romans were very successful because they were simultaneously very, very innovative and very, very traditional. So especially the more they were being innovative, the more they said we're being traditional. And I think that's what we've always done with our scientific approach and looking at what it is we're trying to do rather than dashing headlong into the future. And so if we carry on taking that approach, which I think we will, then we will continue to be very good at bringing order to chaos. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. I have a question before others can ask. If I think back to the last 20 years, and you referenced the online panels. The online panels created a race to the bottom because we think we could do it cheap, and therefore we think clients want it cheaper and they demand it, and quality goes. There is a risk. How big a risk is there that AI will kind of replicate that? It can be done quick and cheap, and therefore rigor will disappear.
Yeah, there is a danger. We've got to hold on to our value. And unfortunately, I mean, I think our founders made a huge mistake years ago in making us limited companies rather than consultancies. Because we always, in the early days, it was always field work times 2. You know, and basically we threw in all the management time. So our model is poor in that sense. I think the other thing that happens, and you notice this in Africa, is when new technologies come in, people come into the market who are just looking to make money. And people who haven't got the respect, if you like, for the history. And we do have to fight back at people who were just piling in, you know, their ethnic minority sample is all Chinese students in the East End or whatever. Not that there aren't any more, but those. But you've got to watch the incomers who look to make too much money out of it. And the other thing is, Bex is going to kill me for wasting time on this. One of the very interesting studies I found recently was a study on the Dunlop de Novo, the first run flat tyre. And they actually interviewed women, because this is 1974 we are now, on whether they had any influence on tyre decision-making, because the run flat tyre was going to be dearer and it was a safety issue. And they wanted to do a group of single women who had bought a new car recently. And they couldn't find any, not a single one. So why was that? So co-pilot and I looked into it. Well, cars were quite expensive in 1974 and women didn't earn quite so much. But actually cars were approximately the average wage. So the average car was approximately the average wage. So I said to co-pilot, I said, well, isn't a car nowadays approximately the average wage? Yeah, and it is when you think about it. Whereas a computer would be 100th, or a washing machine would be 100th. So what's the difference? The difference is credit, that women were not allowed, single women could not take out a loan in 1974. Yeah. Now, nobody worried about that. That was the way it was, whatever. But we do, one of the lessons we can learn is how have the car manufacturers managed to maintain the price of cars so high? Yeah, when, you know, I mean, my brother assures me that these big boxes that everybody drives now are actually cheaper to make. But it must be branding and it must be appealing to men, mustn't it? As a simple answer. But it is quite a remarkable thing that's worth thinking about, which must be about added value and whatever. Yeah, I mean, the Chinese now are adding features, aren't they, to get us to buy Chinese. Anyway, it's an interesting thought.
Okay, any other question?
One from the live stream. Is AJ's mic working?
Okay, I'm going to switch in a minute in between. So
take your mic.
Yes.
So the question from Nikki was, looking back historically, which previous technological shift feels comparable to the AI moment we're in now?
Well, it has to be online, doesn't it? That had the biggest shift. I mean, we argued horribly over telephone, but it was clear that it was all right, and it came in. So it must be AI, I think. But they're all different. They're all different, and it's a little bit like shipbuilding. It affects a different set of people in the industry, doesn't it? I mean, AI is affecting us, whereas online affected our field forces and whatever. So that's probably why it seems a little bit more apocalyptic. I was talking to Peter Kellner the other day, if you remember, he's the John Curtis of his time, and he was saying that he'd always supported liberal pursuits. He supported women, though he wasn't a woman. He supported gays, though he wasn't gay. He supported immigrants, though he wasn't an immigrant. But it come to the assisted dying bill, he suddenly realised he had skin in the game. And this was perhaps a more important issue, which I thought was funny. Sorry, I'm sure I'm overrunning.
Okay, can people hear me? Okay, can we please thank Phyllis? Thank you very much.